Sometimes the most dangerous secrets aren't unearthed by journalists or detectives, but by a child who doesn't yet know to stay silent. A family's power can rest on a single object, a symbol meant to endure for generations. For Harrison Caldwell, heir to a billion-dollar empire, that symbol was a golden ring, unique, irreplaceable, the proof of his dynasty's unbroken line. For Olivia Abbott, the quiet daughter of a housemaid, it was something else entirely, a secret her mother kept hidden in a velvet box. She wasn't searching for answers. She was only returning a pen. But when her eyes fell on Harrison's hand, the words slipped out. Innocent, unplanned, unstoppable. That ring, my mother has the same one. In that instant, a child's whisper struck at the heart of a century-old lie, and what it revealed would threaten to tear an empire apart. His world was built on secrets, but a child's whisper would bring it all down. Harrison Caldwell believed his family's legacy was forged in steel and ambition. He was about to learn it was forged in a lie. The penthouse was a fortress of glass and silence, perched 80 stories above a city that glittered like a fallen constellation. Inside, everything was ordered, intentional, and cold. It was a space that reflected its owner, Harrison Caldwell. At 45, he was a man who had inherited not just a fortune, but a dynasty built on unshakable confidence. His movements were precise, his voice was calm, and his eyes held the detached curiosity of a hawk observing the world from a great and unreachable height. Tonight, like most nights, he worked late in his study. The room was vast, lined with dark mahogany shelves filled with leather-bound books that were rarely opened. The only sounds were the soft click of his keyboard and the distant, muted hum of the city below. His world was a perfectly calibrated machine. Across the enormous room, in a small armchair tucked away in the shadows, sat 11-year-old Olivia Abbott. Her blonde hair fell over a book she held in her lap. She was a quiet child, with eyes the color of a summer sky that saw more than most adults cared to notice. She was waiting for her mother, Carol, to finish her duties. Carol Abbott was Mr. Caldwell's housekeeper, a woman as quiet and meticulous as the space she cared for. For 3 years, she had moved through the silent rooms like a ghost, erasing any sign of disorder, her presence marked only by the perfection she left behind. Harrison worked, his focus absolute. He was reviewing schematics for a new aerospace alloy, a project that would add another billion to the Caldwell empire. He reached for a fountain pen to make a note, but his fingers fumbled, and the heavy silver pen rolled off the massive oak desk. It clattered on the polished marble floor, the sound unnaturally loud in the profound quiet. He sighed, a soft sound of irritation, and began to rise from his chair. "I'll get it, sir." The voice was small but clear. Olivia uncurled herself from the chair and padded across the floor. Her small form was dwarfed by the scale of the room. She knelt, picked up the pen, and walked to his desk. "Here you are," she said, holding it out to him. Harrison barely glanced at her. He was already lost again in the complex equations on his screen. "Thank you, child. Place it on the desk." He reached out a hand, not for the pen, but to gesture to an empty spot, his eyes still fixed on the monitor. As his hand emerged from the starched white cuff of his shirt, the desk lamp caught the heavy gold ring on his right hand. It was a magnificent piece, a signet ring featuring a powerfully sculpted eagle, its wings spread as if in silent command. In its talons, it clutched a single, deeply blue sapphire that glittered like a captive star. Olivia's breath caught. She stared at the ring, her own small hand holding the pin frozen in midair. The world seemed to slow down. She saw that same eagle, that same impossible blue star, not on the hand of a billionaire in a glass tower, but in a worn velvet box tucked away in her mother's sock drawer. The words came out in a whisper, unplanned and unstoppable, born of the simple, honest confusion of a child. "That ring, my mother has the same one." The clicking of the keyboard stopped. For a full 5 seconds, Harrison Caldwell did not move. It was as if her words had frozen time itself. Then, slowly, with an unnerving lack of haste, he turned his head. His eyes, a cool and piercing gray, finally focused on her. The casual indifference was gone. In its place was a stillness so absolute it was menacing. He looked from her wide, innocent eyes down to the ring on his own hand, then back to her. A faint, Almost imperceptible frown line appeared between his brows. He thought he had misheard. "What did you say?" His voice was dangerously soft. It was the kind of quiet that precedes a storm. Olivia felt a sudden chill, a primal sense of having crossed a line she never knew existed. But she had spoken the truth. "The ring," she repeated, her voice trembling slightly now. She pointed a small, hesitant finger. "My mom. She has one just like it. The eagle, and the blue stone, everything." Harrison slowly pulled his hand back, resting it flat on the desk. The golden eagle seemed to glare up at the ceiling. He studied her face, his gaze sharp and analytical. He was searching for the trick, the angle. Was this a poorly conceived shakedown? A coach line from her mother? But all he saw was the guileless certainty of a child. "That is not possible," he said. His tone was not one of argument, but of finality. It was a verdict, delivered from an unassailable height. "But it is," Olivia insisted, her courage fueled by the vivid memory of that ring. "My grandpa gave it to her. He was a war hero. He said it was a medal for being brave." The mention of a grandfather, a war hero, did nothing to soften his expression. It seemed to harden it. He leaned back in his leather chair, the faint squeak of it echoing in the silence. His eyes never left her face. "Your mother's name is Carol Abbott," he stated. It was not a question. "Yes, sir. And she works for me," he continued, his voice flat. "She cleans my home. She handles my possessions." The implication was as cold and sharp as a shard of glass. Olivia felt her cheeks flush with a heat that was part anger, part shame. "My mother doesn't steal," she said, her voice rising with indignation. "I am not making accusations," Harrison said, though his tone did exactly that. "I am stating facts. This ring," he held up his hand, turning it so the light played across the gold, "was forged for my great-grandfather, Alastair Caldwell, nearly a century ago. It is one of a kind. There has never been another. It is the symbol of my family." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle in the vast, silent room. "So, you see, your mother cannot have one just like it. You are mistaken, or you are lying." Tears pricked at the corners of Olivia's eyes. He had called her a liar. He had insulted her mother. He had trampled on the memory of her grandfather. In that moment, he ceased to be a powerful, intimidating man and became merely a cruel one. "I'm not lying," she said, her small hands balling into fists at her sides. "I've held it. I've seen it 100 times. It's real." Just then, the door to the study opened silently. Carol Abbott stood there, a cleaning cloth in her hand. Her face was pale, her expression stricken. She had heard the raised voices. She had heard her daughter's cry. Her eyes darted from Harrison's cold, stony face to Olivia's tear-streaked one. "Olivia," Carol said, her voice barely a whisper. "What's going on?" "Apologize to Mr. Caldwell. He called me a liar, Mom. He said you." Olivia couldn't finish the sentence. Harrison's gaze shifted to Carol. The icy judgment in his eyes intensified. He saw a simple woman, a housekeeper, who had perhaps gotten ambitious. A woman who might have seen an opportunity. "Your daughter has a fascinating story, Mrs. Abbott," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "She seems to believe you possess a family heirloom of mine." Carol's face, already pale, lost all its remaining color. She looked at Olivia, then at the ring on Harrison's hand, and a deep, soul-shaking fear entered her eyes. It was a fear so profound it seemed to suck the very air from the room. "She's a child, sir," Carol stammered, rushing to Olivia's side and putting a protective arm around her shoulders. "She has a wild imagination. She must have seen your ring before and gotten confused. I am so sorry. We will leave you in peace." She began to pull a confused and hurt Olivia toward the door. "Mrs. Abbott," Harrison's voice stopped them. It was cold steel. "See that it doesn't happen again." It wasn't a request. It was a command, laced with a clear, unspoken threat. The message was clear. Your job, your livelihood, exists at my pleasure. Forget this. Carol nodded numbly, without looking back. She hurried Olivia out of the room, her hand gripping her daughter's shoulder with a desperate strength. The heavy study door clicked shut, leaving Harrison Caldwell alone once more in his silent, orderly world. But for the first time in a very long time, the silence felt different. It was not peaceful. It was charged, disturbed. He looked at the ring on his hand. A child's impossible claim. A mother's stark terror. He had dismissed it, crushed it with the weight of his certainty. Yet, a sliver of doubt, sharp and unwelcome, had pierced his fortress of composure. It was a dissonant note in the perfect symphony of his life, and he found, to his profound annoyance, that he could not ignore it. The elevator ride down from the penthouse was a descent into a suffocating silence. Olivia stood beside her mother, the hurt and confusion churning inside her. She kept glancing up at Carol's face, but her mother's expression was a closed door. Her jaw was tight, and she stared straight ahead at the polished steel walls, her eyes seeing something far away, something terrifying. The moment they stepped out into the cool night air of the city, the tension broke. Olivia pulled her hand free. "He didn't believe me, Mom. He thinks we're liars." Carol didn't answer. She walked quickly, her sensible shoes clicking on the pavement. She was heading for the bus stop, her movements clipped and fearful. "Mom," Olivia insisted, hurrying to keep up. "Why did you look so scared? We should have shown him. We could go back home and get it and prove him wrong." "No." The word was sharp, explosive. Carol stopped under the yellow glow of a streetlight and turned to face her daughter. In the harsh light, Olivia could see the tears shimmering in her mother's eyes. "We will do no such thing. You will never speak of that ring to Mr. Caldwell again. You will never speak of it to anyone. Do you understand me, Olivia? This is not a game." "But why?" Olivia's voice cracked. "It's our ring. Grandpa James gave it to you. He was a hero." "Yes, he was," Carol said, her voice softening into a deep, ragged sorrow. She knelt, bringing herself to eye level with her daughter. She took Olivia's small hands in her own, which were rough from years of hard work. "He was the best man I ever knew. And that ring, it was his pride. But it's also his sorrow, honey. It represents a promise that was kept, but also a story that has to stay buried. Some things are too dangerous to dig up." "Dangerous? Who would hurt us?" Carol squeezed her hands, a desperate plea for understanding in her eyes. "Powerful people, Olivia. People like Mr. Caldwell. They don't like being contradicted. They don't like surprises. We have a good life. A simple life. We have each other. I won't risk that. Promise me you'll let this go." Seeing the raw fear in her mother's face, Olivia felt her own indignation melt away, replaced by a reluctant, fearful understanding. She nodded slowly. "I promise." But as they rode the bus home, swaying with the rhythm of the late-night city, Olivia clutched the worn strap of her backpack and stared out at the passing lights. She had made a promise to her mother. She had not made a promise to herself. The image of Harrison Caldwell's cold, dismissive face was burned into her mind. He had called her a liar. He had sullied her mother's honor and her grandfather's memory. And an 11-year-old girl's promise to stay silent is a fragile thing when justice feels so far away. Back in the penthouse, Harrison Caldwell stood before the floor-to-ceiling window, a glass of expensive scotch in his hand. The city lights spread out below him, a kingdom he commanded. But he felt no satisfaction. The encounter with the girl had unsettled him more than any boardroom battle or hostile takeover ever had. "My mother has the same one." It was absurd, preposterous. Yet, the child's conviction and the mother's visceral fear, it didn't align with a simple, clumsy attempt at theft or fraud. The fear was too real. He walked back to his desk, setting the untouched drink down. He swiveled his monitor and with a few keystrokes, made a call over a secure line. A crisp, professional voice answered on the first ring. "Eleanor." "Harrison," replied Eleanor Monroe, his chief legal counsel. For 20 years, Eleanor had been more than a lawyer. She was the architect of the Caldwell defenses, the keeper of secrets, the one who made problems, big and small, disappear. "I need you to run a background check," Harrison said, his voice tight. Discreetly. "Utmost priority." "A new acquisition target?" Eleanor asked, her tone all business. "A person. A woman named Carol Abbott. She works for me. Housekeeping staff." There was a brief, almost imperceptible pause on the other end of the line. Eleanor was too professional to ask personal questions, but the request was unusual. Harrison Caldwell did not concern himself with the domestic staff. "I want everything," Harrison continued, anticipating her unasked question. "Financials, family history, where she came from, who her people were. She has a daughter, Olivia, 11 years old, and a father, deceased. I want to know about him. His name was James Abbott. The girl called him a war hero. Find out if it's true. I want to know everything he ever did, everywhere he ever worked. Cross-reference his name with any and all Caldwell corporate entities, subsidiaries, and shell corporations, past and present. Go back a century. May I ask the nature of the concern, Harrison? Eleanor's voice was carefully neutral. Harrison looked at the Valor Eagle ring on his finger. It's sapphire. I seemed to mock him. There has been an allegation. A baseless, impossible claim related to family property. I want to know who these people are. I want to understand what game they are playing. I'll have a preliminary report for you by morning, Eleanor said. She didn't need to be told twice. After the call, Harrison strode from his office into the private family library, a wing of the penthouse that was more of a shrine than a reading room. He went to a reinforced cabinet and entered a code. Inside lay a single, enormous, leather-bound volume, the Caldwell Chronicles. It was the official, sanitized history of his family, commissioned by his grandfather. He opened it to the section on heirlooms. There, on a yellowed page, was a black-and-white photograph of the ring. His ring. The description was clear and unequivocal. The Valor Eagle signet. Commissioned in 1928 by Alastair Caldwell to commemorate the founding of Caldwell Industries. Forged by the master jeweler Etienne du Bois of Geneva. The design is unique, a symbol of the Caldwell family's strength, vision, and solitary command. Sole ownership has passed from the patriarch to the male heir of each generation. There is no other. He shut the book with a heavy thud. The official record was absolute. The child was mistaken. And yet, he remembered a story. A ghost story his own grandfather, William Caldwell, used to tell on rare occasions after too much brandy. It was a story of Alastair's early days, of a brilliant partner, a man named Elias Vance, who had helped design the company's foundational technologies. The story went that Elias grew greedy and treacherous, that he tried to steal Alastair's company out from under him. He was discovered, disowned, cast out into obscurity. And in his bitter flight, the legend said, he had taken something of great value with him, a symbol of their broken partnership. But the official history, the one in the Caldwell Chronicles, never mentioned a partner. It never mentioned a man named Elias Vance. According to the book, Alastair Caldwell had built his empire alone. It was just a story, Harrison told himself. A cautionary tale about betrayal. But as he stood there in the silent library, the ghost of that story and the whisper of a child seemed to merge, creating a dissonance he could not resolve. He had told his lawyer to find out who Sergeant James Abbott was. But now, with a grim certainty, he realized he needed to find out who Elias Vance was, too. He needed to prove, not just to a little girl but to himself, that the pristine story in the book was the one true history of his name. The next morning, the city was shrouded in a pearl-gray mist, but inside Harrison Caldwell's penthouse, the light was sharp and clinical. He had not slept. The image of the girl's defiant face and her mother's terror had replayed in his mind in a relentless loop. He had spent the night prowling his silent fortress, the perfect order of his world feeling less like a comfort and more like a cage built of brittle, gilded lies. At precisely 8 a.m., his secure line chimed. It was Eleanor. I have the preliminary report, she said, her voice devoid of emotion. It's interesting. Define interesting, Harrison said, his tone clipped. He stood by the window, watching the mist swirl around the neighboring skyscrapers. Carol Abbott is exactly who she appears to be. 42 years old, widowed, no criminal record, impeccable work history. Her financials are meager but stable. She lives in a 2-bedroom apartment in a working-class neighborhood. No red flags. The daughter, Olivia, is a straight-A student at the local public school. And the grandfather? Harrison pressed, turning from the window. The war hero? That part is also true, Eleanor confirmed. Sergeant James Abbott, a highly decorated veteran, served 2 tours, multiple citations for bravery, including a Silver Star. He was wounded in action and honorably discharged. After his service, his life becomes less clear. He worked a series of modest jobs. Security, logistics, manual labor. He died 5 years ago of a heart attack. Harrison's frown deepened. It was the profile of an ordinary, honorable man. It didn't fit the narrative of a con artist or a thief. Is there any connection to my family? To any of our businesses? There was a slight hesitation on Eleanor's end. This is where it becomes unusual, she said. For a period of 6 years, from 1985 to 1991, a James Abel, ABL, worked as a night watchman for a Caldwell subsidiary, a company called Aegis Warehousing. It was a defunct entity used for long-term storage of old company assets. The payroll records are archived, but they're on microfiche. The name change is curious. It could be a simple clerical error, or it could have been intentional. A night watchman at a storage facility. It was a dead end, yet it felt like a clue. A loose thread on a perfectly woven tapestry. And the other name I gave you? Harrison asked, his voice low. Elias Vance. The silence on the line was longer this time. That name is a ghost, Harrison. I've run it through every private and public database. There are a few hits, but none that connect to your family or Caldwell Industries in any significant way. It's almost as if the name has been scrubbed from history. I found a single mention in an obscure financial journal from the 1930s, a footnote in an article about emerging industrialists. It mentions Alastair Caldwell and his shadow partner, whose name was rumored to be Vance. The article was speculative, and a retraction was printed in the following issue, citing gross inaccuracies. After that, nothing. The man, if he existed, vanished. Vanished. The word hung in the air. People like Elias Vance, partners to men like Alastair Caldwell, did not simply vanish. They were made to vanish. Thank you, Eleanor, Harrison said, his mind racing. Continue digging. I want to know what was stored at that Aegis facility. I want to know why a war hero would change his name to guard one of our forgotten buildings. And find me anything at all, on Elias Vance. Use any resource necessary. He ended the call and stood in the center of his study. The information, instead of providing clarity, had only deepened the mystery. A decorated soldier working under a false name in a forgotten Caldwell warehouse. A brilliant partner erased from history. And a little girl who claimed her mother had a ring identical to the one on his finger, a ring that was supposed to be one of a kind. The foundations of his world were shifting. Miles away, in the quiet, sunlit clutter of their small apartment, Olivia Abbott was conducting her own investigation. Her mother had gone to work, leaving with a warning look that said, "Remember your promise." But Olivia's promise felt like a betrayal to her grandfather's memory. She pulled a dusty, worn shoebox from the top of her mother's closet. It was her grandfather's box of treasures. Inside were his medals, tarnished and heavy, a folded flag, and a stack of old, black and white photographs held together by a faded rubber band. She sat on the floor and began to sort through them. There were pictures of her grandfather in his crisp army uniform, looking impossibly young and brave. Pictures of him with her grandmother, both of them smiling. And then she found it. A photograph she had never paid much attention to before. It showed two young men in civilian clothes, standing in front of an old, nondescript brick building. One of them was her grandfather, James. The other man was taller, with intense, intelligent eyes and a confident smile. They both looked full of hope, as if they were on the cusp of something great. On the back of the photograph, in her grandfather's familiar cursive, was an inscription, Elias and me. The beginning. 1985. Elias. The name meant nothing to her. But the year, 1985, it was the year her grandfather had started that new job he rarely spoke of. The job at the warehouse. Olivia's heart began to beat faster. She looked closer at the photograph. The other man, Elias, was wearing a ring on his right hand. The picture was small and slightly blurry, but even so, she could make out the distinct shape of an eagle. It was a ring just like Mr. Caldwell's, and just like the one her mother kept hidden in the velvet box. She carefully put the photograph back and went to her mother's dresser. Her hands trembled as she reached into the sock drawer and felt for the familiar, soft texture of the small box. She lifted the lid. There it was. The golden eagle, its wings spread. The deep blue sapphire clutched in its talons. It wasn't just like Mr. Caldwell's ring. It was its twin. Her grandfather hadn't lied. Her mother wasn't a thief. And Olivia was not mistaken. A new feeling began to replace her hurt and confusion, determination. Cold, clear, and unshakable. Mr. Caldwell had called her a liar in his glass tower, surrounded by his power and his wealth. He thought he could make the truth disappear with a single, dismissive word. Olivia looked from the ring in the box to the photograph of her grandfather and his friend, Elias. The two pieces of a puzzle she was only beginning to understand. She didn't know who Elias was, or why her grandfather had his ring, or how Mr. Caldwell fit into any of it. But she knew one thing for certain. This was not just a story about a piece of jewelry. It was a story about her family, and she would not let it stay buried. She closed the box, a new resolve hardening her young face. Her promise to her mother was to stay silent. But the truth, she now realized, had a voice of its own, and it was starting to get very, very loud. Harrison's world operated on data, on verifiable facts and quantifiable assets. But the problem of the Abbott family and the ghost named Elias Vance was different. It was a problem of history, of memory, and he suspected, of deceit. Eleanor's official channels had hit a wall he believed his family had intentionally built. There was only one place left to look, the Caldwell family archives. It was a place he had not visited since he was a boy. Located in the sub-basement of the original Caldwell Industries building downtown, the archives were a climate-controlled vault, a tomb of paper and secrets. His father had called it the family's memory. But even as a child, Harrison had understood it was a place where memories were not just stored, but buried. He dismissed his driver and took the private elevator down into the earth. The air grew cool and smelled of old paper and preservation chemicals. He unlocked the heavy steel door and stepped inside. Rows of tall, rolling shelves stretched out in the dim light, filled with thousands of acid-free boxes. Everything was meticulously labeled: corporate ledgers, 1930 to 1940, acquisition contracts, patent filings. It was the official story, the one written in the Caldwell Chronicles. Harrison ignored it all. He walked to the far end of the vault, to a section marked simply Alistair C. Private. These were the boxes that were not part of the corporate record. They contained his great-grandfather's personal effects, items deemed unworthy of the official history. He pulled out a box labeled Journals, 1925 to 1935. Inside were a dozen leather-bound diaries, their pages filled with Alistair Caldwell's elegant, forceful script. Harrison sat at a stark metal table under a single, harsh light bulb and began to read. For hours, he lost himself in the mind of the man who had founded his dynasty. He read of Alistair's ambitions, his fears, his ruthless business tactics. It was all familiar. But then, a name began to appear, a name that was nowhere in the official chronicle: Elias. June 12, 1928, Alistair wrote, "Elias has done it again. His work on the turbine engine is nothing short of miraculous. He sees the world in a way I cannot. Not as a collection of assets to be conquered, but as a puzzle of elegant, interlocking systems. I am the fist, but he is the brain. Together, we are unstoppable." Harrison's breath caught. This was not the language one used to describe a subordinate, let alone a future traitor. It was the language of partnership, of brotherhood. He read on, his fingers tracing the faded ink. September 3rd, 1928. We celebrated our first major contract tonight. To mark the occasion, I presented Elias with his ring. Etienne Du Bois delivered them this morning. 2 perfect eagles, symbols of our shared vision. Twins, just as we are. One for the fist, one for the brain. I shall wear mine as a sign of my command, and he shall wear his as a sign of his genius. The Caldwell Vance eagle will soar. Harrison felt a cold dread creep up his spine. Caldwell Vance. 2 rings. Twins. The girl had been telling the truth. The impossible was real. His entire life, the entire history of his family, was built on a lie. He frantically flipped through the pages, the story darkening with every entry. He read of their growing success, but also of a rising tension. Alistair wrote of pressure from his own family, of their distrust of Elias, the brilliant son of a mechanic who owned half of their creation, but none of their pedigree. May 21st, 1931. My father is poisoning the well. He calls Elias a parasite, a threat to the Caldwell name. He demands I buy him out, sever the tie. But how can I sever my own right hand? Elias is this company. His name is on the patents. His soul is in the steel. The final entry about Elias was dated a year later. The tone was stark, stripped of all its earlier warmth. It was the cold, detached voice Harrison recognized as his own. July 14th, 1932. It is done. The board has voted. The Vance name has been removed from all corporate charters. His patents have been absorbed. A settlement has been offered, a pittance for a kingdom. He called me a traitor, a thief. Perhaps he is right. But a legacy cannot be shared. It must be taken. My family is secure. The Caldwell name is absolute. I have recorded the official story as it will be remembered. I built this empire alone. Harrison leaned back, the journal falling open in his lap. The silence of the vault was immense. He was sitting in the tomb of a man he had never known, but whose sins he had inherited. Alistair had not just betrayed his partner, he had erased him from existence. He had stolen his work, his name, his legacy, and he had stolen his ring. But how had that ring, Elias Vance's ring, ended up in the possession of a war hero named James Abbott? He thought of the warehouse, Aegis, a place for storing old assets. He thought of James Abbott working there under a false name. It wasn't a dead end. It was a hiding place. He pulled out his phone. The signal was weak, but it was there. He called Eleanor. "I'm in the private archives," he said, his voice hoarse. "I know about Elias Vance. I know about the second ring." Eleanor was silent for a moment. "I see," she said softly. There was no surprise in her voice. She had been the keeper of secrets for a long time. She knew some doors were never meant to be opened. "The Aegis warehouse," Harrison said, his mind piecing it together. "What was stored there?" "Old patent prototypes, mostly," Eleanor replied, "and the personal effects of disgraced executives. Everything was scheduled for incineration in the early 90s, but the facility was shut down before the order was carried out. It's been sealed ever since." Personal effects. A hiding place. It was all starting to make a terrible, tragic sense. Elias Vance, cast out and erased, had likely hidden his most precious possessions, his research, his journals, his proof of partnership, in the one place Alistair Caldwell would never think to look, inside the belly of the beast that had betrayed him. And years later, a young security guard, a war hero named James Abbott, must have found them. A man of honor. A man who recognized a story of injustice. A man who decided, in that forgotten warehouse, to become the keeper of a secret, the guardian of a ghost's legacy, a legacy symbolized by a single golden ring. The Aegis warehousing facility was a relic, a brick-and-steel ghost squatting in a forgotten industrial sector of the city. Weeds grew through cracks in the asphalt lot. The windows were boarded up, and a heavy chain, thick with rust, was wrapped around the gate. It was a place the world had left behind, a perfect tomb for secrets. Harrison arrived alone as dawn was breaking, the sky the color of a fresh bruise. He used a set of master keys he hadn't known existed until Eleanor had the messenger to his car. The old lock on the gate groaned in protest, the sound unnaturally loud in the morning stillness. The main warehouse door slid open with a screech of metal on metal, revealing a cavernous space filled with shrouded shapes and the thick, heavy scent of decay. Dust motes danced in the beams of his flashlight. He moved through aisles of forgotten machinery, covered in white cloths like sleeping giants. He was guided by a faded floor plan Eleanor had unearthed, heading for a section designated long-term executive containment. It was a corporate euphemism that sent a chill down his spine. This was where inconvenient people's histories were sent to die. He found a small, windowless office at the back of the warehouse. The door was unlocked. Inside, the air was stale and suffocating. A simple wooden desk and a chair were coated in a thick layer of dust. This must have been James Abbott's station, the place where a war hero had stood guard, night after night, over a dead man's legacy. Harrison felt a strange sense of reverence, of trespassing on hallowed ground. Against the far wall was a row of sealed metal lockers. One was labeled with a simple, typed sticker, Vance, E. Harrison's heart hammered against his ribs. He pried it open with a crowbar he'd brought. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the silent warehouse. Inside were several cardboard boxes, brittle with age. Harrison carefully lifted the top one and placed it on the dusty desk. He wiped the lid with his hand, leaving a clean streak in the gray dust. His hands, usually so steady, trembled slightly as he opened it. The contents were a time capsule of a stolen life. There were rolled-up blueprints, filled with elegant, complex designs far ahead of their time. There were scientific journals filled with equations and theories that were the very bedrock of Caldwell Industries. And underneath it all, there was a personal journal, its leather cover cracked and faded. It was Elias Vance's. Harrison sat in the dusty chair and, by the stark beam of his flashlight, began to read. Elias's voice was vibrant, full of passion and genius. He wrote of his dreams, his inventions, and his deep, abiding friendship with Alistair Caldwell. The early pages were filled with hope. October 5th, 1928. Alistair is more than a partner. He is a brother. He sees the fire in me and is not afraid of being burned. He provides the steel, and I provide the spark. The world will be a better place for what we build together. Then, just as in Alistair's journals, the tone began to shift. Elias wrote of the creeping influence of the Caldwell family, of their snobbery and greed. He wrote of Alistair becoming distant, his talk turning from innovation to legacy, from partnership to dynasty. March 11th, 1932. He asked me to sell my shares. He called it a formality, a way to appease his father. He promised nothing would change. I looked into his eyes and saw a stranger. The brother I knew was gone, replaced by a king who could not bear to share his throne. The final entry was a howl of pain and betrayal, scribbled in a frantic, angry hand. July 14th, 1932. He has stolen it all. My name, my work, my future. He has left me with nothing but a check, blood money I will not cash. He has erased me, but he cannot erase the truth. I will keep my ring, the twin to his, as a symbol not of our partnership, but of his treachery. One day, the world will know what he did. One day, the eagle will find its conscience. Tucked into the back of the journal was a sealed envelope. On the front, in the same faded ink, were the words, "To whom it may concern." Harrison opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a sworn affidavit, legally notarized, detailing the terms of the original Caldwell-Vance partnership agreement. It listed the patents registered under both their names and described the creation of the two identical Valor Eagle rings as a symbol of their equal ownership. It was the smoking gun, the irrefutable proof. At the bottom of the box, Harrison found one last thing, a small, velvet pouch. Inside was not a ring, but a simple, tarnished silver locket. He opened it. On one side was a tiny, faded photograph of Elias Vance. On the other was a picture of a woman with a kind, gentle smile. Beneath her picture, a name was engraved, Eleonora. Harrison sank back into the chair, the weight of a century of lies crashing down on him. He was the heir to a thief and a traitor. His great-grandfather hadn't built an empire, he had stolen one. The foundation of his life was not steel and ambition, but betrayal and dust. He looked around the forgotten office, at the locker full of a great man's stolen legacy. He thought of James Abbott, the decorated soldier who had found this, who had understood its importance, and who had chosen to become its silent protector. He hadn't kept the ring as a trophy. He had kept it as evidence. He had passed it down to his daughter, entrusting her with a truth he could not reveal himself, a quiet, desperate plea for justice that had finally, through the innocent words of a child, found its voice. The first rays of dawn were now filtering through the grimy warehouse windows. The light was weak and gray, but it was light nonetheless. Harrison Caldwell, the king in his glass fortress, had descended into the tomb of his family's sins. He knew, with a certainty that shook him to his core, that he could not leave the truth buried here. He had to carry it back into the light, no matter what the cost. While Harrison was unearthing the sins of the past in a dusty warehouse, Olivia Abbott was preparing for her own act of rebellion. She sat at the small kitchen table in their apartment, the morning light illuminating the two objects in front of her, her grandfather's photograph of the two young men and the heavy gold ring in its worn velvet box. Her mother's fear was a constant, nagging presence in her mind. Powerful people, Olivia. People like Mr. Caldwell. But a more powerful force was at work in her 11-year-old heart, a fierce, unyielding sense of justice. Mr. Caldwell hadn't just insulted her and her mother. He had insulted the memory of the kindest man she had ever known. He had dismissed her grandfather's honor as if it were nothing. She couldn't fight a billionaire with money or power. She didn't have lawyers or private investigators. All she had was the truth. And the truth, she reasoned, needed a custodian. It needed someone who would believe her. After her mother left for work, Olivia carefully placed the photograph and the ring box into her backpack. She had a plan. It was a child's plan, born of equal parts desperation and the simple, unwavering logic of the schoolyard. When you are being bullied by someone bigger and stronger, you find a teacher. You find an adult who will listen. She took the city bus not to her school, but downtown. She walked, her small form determined, past the towering glass and steel buildings until she stood before the grand, marble facade of the City Historical Society. It was the biggest, most important-looking library she had ever seen. If anyone cared about history, about the real story of things, it would be the people in here. Her heart pounded as she pushed open the enormous bronze doors. Inside, the air was cool and smelled of old books and floor polish. A stern-looking woman with glasses perched on the end of her nose sat at a massive information desk. "Can I help you, young lady?" the woman asked, her voice as dry as old paper. Olivia's courage almost failed her. She felt small and out of place. She clutched the straps of her backpack. I have something that I think is important," she stammered. "A piece of history." The woman raised a skeptical eyebrow. "Oh, and what might that be?" Olivia took a deep breath. She pulled the velvet box and the old photograph from her bag and placed them on the polished counter. "This ring," she said, her voice growing stronger, "belonged to a man who helped start Caldwell Industries. And this is a picture of him with my grandpa, the founder of the company, Alastair Caldwell. He erased this other man from history. He stole his company. And my grandpa, he kept his secret safe." The librarian picked up the photograph, her expression shifting from skepticism to curiosity. She looked at the two young men, then glanced at the ring. She wasn't a jewelry expert, but she recognized the name Caldwell. It was a name etched in steel all over the city. "That's quite a story," the woman said, her tone softening slightly. "What is the other man's name?" "Elias Vance," Olivia said, the name feeling momentous on her tongue. The librarian's eyes widened almost imperceptibly. She was a historian. She knew the official story, the one in the books. But like all good historians, she also knew that the official story is often the least truthful one. She had heard whispers, academic rumors of a shadow partner, a ghost in the Caldwell machine. But it had never been more than a footnote, a historical dead end. Until now. She looked at the small, blonde girl standing before her, her face a mixture of fear and fierce resolve. She saw the heavy, impossible ring. She saw the faded photograph. This wasn't a child's fantasy. This was evidence. "I think," the librarian said slowly, taking off her glasses, "that you should talk to our chief archivist. His name is Mr. Abernathy. He has a particular interest in the city's founding families." As Olivia was led into the quiet, scholarly depths of the Historical Society, she felt a small flicker of hope. She had found her teacher. She had found someone who was willing to listen. She didn't know that her small act of defiance was about to set in motion a chain of events that would shake the city to its foundations. She had brought a ghost story into the light, and now, the historians, the people who dealt in facts and evidence, were about to give that ghost a voice. The truth, once spoken, could not be unsaid. And Olivia Abbott, the quiet housekeeper's daughter, had just ensured that the whisper in the penthouse would soon become a roar that even a man like Harrison Caldwell could not ignore. Harrison Caldwell returned to his penthouse, but he was not the same man who had left it hours earlier. The fortress of glass and silence no longer felt like a symbol of his power, but a monument to a colossal lie. He walked through the immaculate rooms, his shoes leaving dusty footprints on the polished marble floors, the first sign of disorder the home had seen in years. He placed the box containing Elias Vance's journals and the sworn affidavit on the massive oak desk in his study, a tangible piece of the past that now held the power to shatter his future. He made 2 calls. The first was to Eleanor. "I have it all," he said, his voice flat, devoid of its usual commanding tone. "The journals, the blueprints, a legal affidavit. It's worse than we could have imagined. What are your instructions, Harrison?" Eleanor's voice was calm, the steady anchor in the storm she knew was coming. "Cancel my appointments for the rest of the week," he said, "and prepare a press release. The headline will be, 'Caldwell Industries announces historical partnership with Vance Legacy.' You and I will draft it. The truth. All of it." There was a pause. "Harrison, a move like that will be catastrophic for the stock. The board will demand your resignation. Your family will crucify you." "My family's name is already a crime," Harrison retorted, his voice laced with a bitterness that was new and raw. "It's time to pay the debt. Do it, Eleanor." The second call was to his mother, a formidable matriarch who lived in the family's ancestral estate, a woman who valued the Caldwell name above all else, truth, honor, and even her own son. He told her what he had found. He told her of Alastair's betrayal, of Elias Vance, of the 2 rings. Her reaction was not of shock or shame, but of cold, reptilian fury. "You will bury this, Harrison," she commanded, her voice like ice. "You will burn those papers, and you will silence that woman and her child. This family did not build an empire by being sentimental. We built it by being strong. Do not let the whining of a ghost and the fantasy of a servant girl destroy 100 years of work." "It was 100 years of theft," Harrison said quietly. "It ends now." He hung up the phone before she could reply, severing the tie not just of the call, but of a lifetime of cold, conditional loyalty. Meanwhile, a different kind of storm was brewing in the hushed halls of the City Historical Society. Mr. Abernathy, the chief archivist, a man with a passion for historical justice, had spent the morning verifying Olivia's story. He'd had the ring authenticated by a specialist who confirmed its age and craftsmanship were consistent with the period. He cross-referenced the name Elias Vance with his own private archives and found tantalizing, previously ignored references that corroborated the story of a shadow partner. The photograph and the ring were not just a child's curiosities. They were historical artifacts of immense significance. He made a quiet, unofficial call to a trusted contact at the city's leading newspaper. He spoke hypothetically, of course, about a major historical discovery that could potentially reframe the legacy of one of the city's most powerful families. The journalist's interest was piqued. The whispers had begun. The loudest sound of all, however, was the terrified beating of Carol Abbott's heart. She had received a call from her supervisor. Mr. Caldwell had given her the rest of the week off, paid. It was not a kindness. It was a dismissal, a severance. She knew, with a gut-wrenching certainty, that this was because of Olivia. She rushed home from work, her mind filled with visions of eviction notices and unemployment lines. She found Olivia sitting at the kitchen table, doing her homework as if it were any other day. "What did you do?" Carol asked, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and anger. Olivia looked up, her expression resolute. "I did what was right, Mom. I told the truth." She explained her trip to the Historical Society, her voice clear and steady. The color drained from Carol's face. "Olivia, no. I told you to let it go. You have no idea what you've done. You've gone against a man who can crush us with a single phone call. We are going to lose everything." "No, we're not," Olivia said, her childish innocence now fused with an unshakable conviction. "We have the truth. That's more than he has." Just then, Carol's phone rang. The number was blocked. She answered with a trembling hand. "Mrs. Abbott?" The voice was deep, calm, and instantly recognizable. It was Harrison Caldwell. Carol's heart stopped. This was it. The call to ruin them. "My name is Harrison Caldwell," he continued, as if she could ever forget. "I would like to request a meeting with you and your daughter. Not in my office. In your home, if you would allow it. There is something I need to return to you." Carol was speechless. His tone was not angry or threatening. It was respectful, confused, terrified, and with no other option, she whispered, "Yes, of course." She hung up the phone and looked at her daughter, whose expression showed no fear, only a quiet, solemn expectation. For the first time, Carol began to wonder if her daughter's faith in the truth was not naive, but was, in fact, the most powerful weapon they had ever possessed. The arrival of Harrison Caldwell at their modest apartment building was a surreal event. He came not in a chauffeured limousine, but in a simple black sedan which he drove himself. He wore no suit, but a plain gray sweater and dark trousers. He looked smaller without the armor of his wealth, more human. He carried a single, old cardboard box. Carol opened the door, her hands clenched at her sides. Olivia stood just behind her, her gaze steady and unafraid. "Mrs. Abbott." "Olivia," Harrison said, his voice quiet. "Thank you for seeing me." He stepped inside. The apartment was small, meticulously clean, and filled with the simple warmth of a loving home. It was a world away from his sterile penthouse, and in that moment, Harrison felt the full, crushing weight of the chasm that separated his life from the lives his family had damaged. He stood awkwardly in the center of the small living room. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to the box. Carol nodded numbly. He placed the box on the coffee table and opened it. He laid out the contents one by one. Elias Vance's journals, the blueprints, the sworn affidavit, and the small silver locket. "I believe these belong to you," he said, his voice heavy with a shame so profound it seemed to pain him to speak. Or rather, they belong to your family. He looked directly at Olivia, his gray eyes holding no condescension, only a deep, weary respect. You were right, he said, and I was wrong. I called you a liar, and for that, I will spend the rest of my life trying to apologize. He then turned to Carol. Your father, James Abbott, he began, his voice thick with emotion, was a greater man than anyone in my family. He found this box in a warehouse he was guarding. He understood what it meant. He chose not to sell it, not to use it for blackmail, but to protect it. He became the custodian of a truth my family tried to murder. He passed that duty on to you, and you passed it on to your daughter. He slid the affidavit across the table. This is a legal document proving that Elias Vance was the co-founder and equal partner of the company that bears my name. Your grandfather was Elias Vance's only grandson. After Elias was betrayed by my great-grandfather, he changed his name, joined the army, and tried to disappear to protect his family from the Caldwells. Your father, James, was his son. The room fell silent. Carol sank onto the sofa, her hand covering her mouth as tears streamed down her face. She was not the descendant of a simple soldier. She was the heir to a stolen legacy. Her grandfather was Elias Vance. The ring was not just a symbol of bravery, but a birthright. Olivia, however, did not cry. She simply watched Harrison, her expression one of solemn understanding. She had known, with the unshakable certainty of a child's heart, that her family was honorable. What will you do? She asked, her voice clear and direct. It was the question of a peer, not a child. Harrison looked at this small, 11-year-old girl who had dismantled his entire world with a single sentence. She was not asking for money. She was asking for justice. First, he said, I am going to tell the world the truth. I am going to restore Elias Vance's name to its rightful place in history. Caldwell Industries will be officially rebranded. His name will be on every building, every product, every letterhead. Second, I am going to make financial restitution. The Vance estate, which is legally yours, is entitled to half of the company's value, calculated from the day of its founding. Carol gasped. The number was astronomical, beyond comprehension. But that is not enough, Harrison continued, his gaze fixed on Olivia. A debt like this can't be paid with money alone. It must be paid with purpose. I am dissolving the Caldwell Family Trust and using its assets to create the Vance Abbott Foundation. Its mission will be to find and fund the brilliant minds my family would have dismissed, the inventors, the artists, the thinkers from humble beginnings. It will be a legacy of creation, not theft. He paused, then took a deep breath. And finally, he said, looking at Carol, I would ask you, as the heir to Elias Vance, to sit on its board. And I would ask Olivia, when she is old enough, to one day lead it. My family's legacy is one of taking. I want yours to be one of building. Help me build something worthy of the truth you have guarded. He had come to their home not to offer a settlement, but to surrender. He had offered them not just their stolen fortune, but the power to remake his family's name into something good. Carol, through her tears, could only nod. Olivia stepped forward. She looked at the ring Mr. Caldwell wore, the twin to her own. Then she looked at the silver locket on the table. She picked it up and opened it, looking at the kind faces of her great-grandparents, Elias and Eleonora. She looked up at the billionaire who now seemed so humbled. You can't fix what your family broke, she said with a wisdom far beyond her years. But you can build something new. It was an absolution and a command. In that small, sunlit living room, the sins of the past were finally brought into the light, not to be erased, but to be acknowledged, and from their ashes, something new, something better, was about to be born. The whisper in the penthouse had become a promise that would finally be kept. And that's where we'll end the story for now. Whenever I share one of these, I hope it gives you a chance to step out of the everyday and just drift for a bit. I'd love to know what you were doing while listening. Maybe relaxing after work, on a late-night drive, or just winding down. Drop a line in the comments. I really do read them all. And if you want to make sure we cross paths again, hitting like and subscribing makes a huge difference. Thanks for spending this time with me.